Before we get to the story, I'd like to say thanks so much for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading cosmic horror related stories every single day. So if that sounds good, please drop a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a lot, especially when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. I've been watching the stars my whole life. Started when I was a boy on my grandfather's farm, lying in the bed of his pickup truck while he pointed out the constellations: Orion the Hunter, the Big Dipper, Cassiopeia in her chair. By the time I was 16, I could navigate by the stars alone, and by the time I was 20, I was flying planes through the night sky, those ancient patterns guiding me home. My name is Nolan Pryce. I'm 52 years old, and I own a small airstrip outside of Cutter's Mill, Montana. Population 2,000, give or take. I bought the place 8 years ago after my wife passed, using the savings we'd built during my 20 years as a commercial pilot. It's a modest operation. Charter flights for hunters and fishermen, flight lessons for locals who want to learn, occasional cargo runs when someone needs something moved fast. Mostly, though, I sit outside my office on clear nights and watch the sky. It's a habit I never broke, even after I stopped flying professionally. The stars feel like old friends, reliable and constant. In a world where everything changes, they're the one thing that stays the same. At least, that's what I believed, until that night in late September. It was a Tuesday, around 9 in the evening. I was sitting in my usual spot, an old lawn chair positioned on the concrete apron outside the main hangar, drinking coffee and watching the stars emerge as the last light faded from the western horizon. The air was cool, but not cold. The kind of perfect autumn evening that makes you grateful to be alive. I noticed something wrong, but at first I couldn't identify what. The sky looked different somehow, brighter maybe, or the stars seemed closer than usual. I focused on Orion, just rising in the east, a constellation I'd known since childhood. One of the stars in the belt was slightly out of position. I told myself I was imagining things. Stars don't move, not perceptibly, not in a human lifetime. Their apparent motion across the sky is just the Earth rotating beneath them. The constellations my grandfather showed me are the same ones the ancient Greeks saw thousands of years ago. But I kept watching, and over the next hour, I became certain. Stars were moving that shouldn't be moving. Not all of them, just a few scattered across the sky, drifting slowly like boats on a lazy current. I went inside and pulled out my old star charts, the ones I used to teach navigation to my students. I compared what the sky should look like to what I was seeing through the window. Multiple stars were out of position, and they were still moving. I picked up the phone and called Warren Briggs. Warren was a retired airline captain who lived in town, a man I'd known for 15 years. We'd shared countless hours talking about flying, about the sky, about the things we'd seen during our careers. If anyone would understand what I was seeing, it was Warren. He answered on the third ring, and I could hear the confusion in his voice before he said a word. "Nolan, are you watching the sky?" "I am." "Tell me I'm not crazy. Tell me the stars aren't moving." I couldn't tell him that. We stayed on the phone for the next 2 hours, watching together from miles apart, neither of us able to explain what we were seeing. The movement was slow, but undeniable. points of light that should have been fixed in their eternal positions, were drifting across the backdrop of space. "They're not falling," Warren said at one point. "If they were meteors, they'd be falling. These are drifting, like something swimming." I turned on my aviation radio and scanned the frequencies. The chatter was immediate and overwhelming. Pilots in the air, control towers on the ground, all reporting the same phenomenon. Some voices were calm, professional, sticking to procedure. Others were panicking. One pilot, his voice shaking badly, described what he was seeing from 30,000 feet. "They're everywhere. The whole sky is moving. What do I do? What the hell do I do?" I switched on the small television in my office, and that's when I understood that this wasn't just happening over Montana. Emergency broadcasts had interrupted regular programming. Anchors sat behind desks looking pale and frightened, cutting to the experts who seemed just as confused as everyone else. Observatories around the world were reporting the same thing. Thousands of stars had begun to move. An astronomer appeared on screen, a woman with grey hair and glasses, visibly struggling to maintain her composure. "What we're seeing cannot be stars," she said. "Stars are too massive, too distant to move perceptibly in human timeframes. These objects, whatever they are, have been stationary in our sky for as long as humans have observed them. But they were never stars. They only looked like stars because they were luminescent and very far away." She paused, swallowing hard. "We're seeing something that has always been there, but we never understood what we were looking at. The objects appear to be organic, living things that emit their own light, and they're moving now because something has triggered a migration." I sat down heavily in my chair, the phone still pressed to my ear. "Warren," I said, "are you hearing this?" "I'm hearing it. They're saying some of the stars are alive, that they've always been alive." Warren was quiet for a long moment. "Then we've been looking at them our whole lives," he finally said. "Every night, thinking they were just lights in the sky." The migration involved thousands of the organisms, possibly millions. They were spread across a vast region of space, but they were all moving in roughly the same direction. Earth's solar system happened to be in their path. The astronomer stressed that this didn't appear to be an attack. The organisms weren't heading for Earth specifically, but their passage would bring them closer than anything like this had ever been. She couldn't say what would happen when they arrived. No one could. By midnight, the sky over Cutter's Mill no longer looked like any sky I had ever seen. The familiar stars were still there, the patterns I'd known since childhood. But they were joined by hundreds of new lights, some drifting slowly across the backdrop of space, others growing brighter as they approached. The darkness between stars seemed to be filling in, becoming luminous, as if the void itself was coming alive. I stood on the runway, looking up, unable to look away. The scale was incomprehensible. These things had been drifting in the void since before humans existed, and now they were passing through like a herd of animals crossing a plain. Around 1 in the morning, the first organisms entered visible range. They were no longer points of light. They had shape, dimension, form. I saw one pass overhead. My mind struggled to process what I was witnessing. It was vast, miles across at least, glowing with soft bioluminescence that shifted from blue to gold. As I watched, the shape was organic but utterly alien. Nothing like any creature on Earth. Nothing like anything I could have imagined. It moved with slow, deliberate grace, drifting through the upper atmosphere without seeming to notice the planet below. As it passed, I felt something change. The air became charged, electric, making the hair on my arms stand up. The lights in my office flickered and died. My radio crackled with static, then went silent. In the distance, I could see the lights of Cutter's Mill winking out, the whole town going dark. The organism continued on, unconcerned, and more were following. I retreated to my hangar as more organisms descended through the atmosphere. The building was solid, metal-framed, and it made me feel marginally safer. Through the windows, I watched the sky fill with light and movement. Some of the organisms were small enough that I could see individual features, appendages that might have been fins or wings, surfaces that pulsed with bioluminescence, structures that served purposes I couldn't begin to guess. Others were so large they filled my entire field of vision, blocking out half the sky as they passed. I was struck by how beautiful they were. The light pulsed in patterns, colors shifting and flowing like aurora borealis given form. They moved with a grace that seemed almost choreographed, avoiding each other, maintaining formation. If I didn't know better, I might have thought I was watching a nature documentary about deep-sea creatures. But these creatures were the size of mountains, and they were passing over my head like a river flowing through the sky. I heard an engine around 2 a.m. Headlights cut through the strange luminous dark, and I saw Warren's old pickup bouncing along the access road toward the hangar. He pulled up and stumbled out, looking wild-eyed and terrified. "My house," he said. One of them came down low, right over my property. The roof caved in from the pressure, not from impact. It didn't touch anything, just the pressure of it passing over. I brought him inside, and we waited together. The migration continued for hours, an endless stream of organisms flowing through the sky. Some passed high overhead, barely affecting the surface. Others descended lower, and when they did, the effects were devastating. Through the hangar windows, we saw distant flashes on the horizon. Not explosions, but the glow of organisms passing close to the ground. We heard sounds that didn't make sense, deep rumbles that shook the building, high keening tones that seemed to come from everywhere at once, vibrations that resonated in our chests like a second heartbeat. Not all the organisms looked the same. Some were roughly spherical, pulsing with light like deep-sea jellyfish. Others were elongated, serpentine, trailing luminescent tendrils that spanned miles. Some traveled in clusters, dozens of smaller organisms moving as one. The variety suggested an entire ecosystem, different species sharing the same migration route. I wondered how many different forms of life were passing overhead, how many different worlds' worth of creatures. As the night wore on, Warren became increasingly distressed. He was a practical man, a veteran who had flown combat missions in 2 wars. He'd seen things that gave him nightmares for decades, but this was beyond anything he could process. "We thought we knew the sky," he said, his voice breaking. "We thought we understood what was up there, but we were looking at them the whole time. Every night of our lives, we were looking right at them, and we thought they were stars." I didn't know what to say. He was right. Everything we believed about the night sky was wrong. Around 4 a.m, the hangar began to shake. I looked out the window. and saw something descending that made my legs go weak. This organism was larger than anything that had passed before, not miles across, but tens of miles, perhaps hundreds. It was so large that I couldn't see its edges, couldn't comprehend its full shape. It filled the entire sky, blocking out everything else, a living ceiling of luminescent flesh. The air became almost impossible to breathe, heavy and thick. My ears popped painfully. The metal walls of the hangar groaned under stress. Warren collapsed to his knees, hands over his ears, screaming something I couldn't hear over the pressure. Outside, I could see the ground rippling, the pressure wave from the organism's passage physically distorting the earth. The bioluminescence was overwhelming, brighter than daylight. I had to shield my eyes, looking through my fingers at the patterns swirling across its surface. I could see structures within the glow, vast organs or features that served purposes beyond human understanding. For a moment, I had the terrible sense that it was looking back at me, that something that vast could somehow perceive something as small as a man in the hangar. But the moment passed, and the organism continued on, its leading edge moving past, more of its bulk following. It took nearly an hour to pass. We crouched in the hangar, enduring the pressure, the noise, the impossible light. When it finally moved on, the relief was so profound that I wept. The sky was still full of other organisms, but they seemed small now, manageable. The worst had passed. We survived. As the first grey light of dawn appeared on the eastern horizon, the migration began to thin. The organisms were still passing, but fewer now, the main body of the swarm having moved through. The familiar stars were becoming visible again in the spaces between the creatures. I stepped outside for the first time in hours and breathed air that tasted like ozone and something else, something organic and alien. In the growing light, I could see the toll the night had taken. Several of my planes had been damaged, pushed off their blocks by pressure waves. The windsock was gone, the pole bent nearly horizontal. In the direction of town, I could see smoke rising from multiple locations. The migration wasn't violent, wasn't intentional, but its passage had left destruction in its wake. Warren walked the perimeter of the airstrip, looking older than he had yesterday. "I flew combat missions in 2 wars," he said. "I've seen things that gave me nightmares for decades, but I never felt small. Not really small, not until tonight. I understood. We were ants beneath the feet of elephants, and the elephants never even noticed we were there." By mid-morning, power began to return to some areas. My radio crackled back to life, filled with voices. Emergency services coordinating responses, pilots checking in, ordinary people trying to find loved ones. Reports from town suggested casualties, collapsed buildings, car accidents, people who were caught outside when organisms passed low. But it could have been worse. It could have been so much worse. The television came back on around noon. The news showed footage from around the world. The migration had passed over the entire planet as Earth rotated beneath it. Some regions were hit harder than others, depending on how low the organisms descended. Cities were damaged, infrastructure was disrupted, thousands were dead. But humanity had survived. The migration had passed. The organisms had continued to mass Earth, moving deeper into the solar system, or perhaps out the other side. Their destination was unknown, their purpose unclear. They were migrating, following some instinct or pattern that predated human existence. Earth was simply in the way. One scientist, calmer now than the night before, tried to put things in perspective. For as long as humans have looked at the night sky, they've seen points of light and assumed they were all stars. Some of them were, but some of them were these creatures, so distant that their luminescence appeared as mere dots. They've always been there. We just didn't know what we were looking at. He paused, choosing his words carefully. The universe is more alive than we ever imagined, and we are very, very small within it. That evening, as the sun set, I walked out to the runway. I was exhausted, hadn't slept in nearly 40 hours, but I needed to see. The sky darkened, and the stars emerged, one by one. They looked the same as they always did. Familiar patterns, ancient light. But I knew better now. I looked at Orion, at the Big Dipper, at all the constellations I'd known since childhood. Which of those points of light were suns, burning billions of miles away? And which of them was something else, something alive, something that might someday move? I couldn't tell. There was no way to tell. They all looked the same from here. The sky I trusted, the sky I loved, had become something uncertain and strange. Warren walked out and stood beside me, looking up. "I keep thinking about all the nights I spent watching the stars," he said. "All those years of looking up and feeling peaceful, feeling like I understood something about my place in the universe. And now I know I didn't understand anything. None of us did." We stood in silence, watching the sky that was no longer quite the sky we knew. Warren eventually headed home to assess the damage, to start rebuilding what he could. I stayed on the runway, alone with my thoughts. I thought about the migration, about where the organisms came from and where they were going. I thought about the Great One, the organism so vast it took an hour to pass, and wondered how something like that could exist. I thought about whether this would happen again, another migration, another passage, another night when the stars came down. There was no way to know, no way to predict. The universe operates on scales and schedules that have nothing to do with human concerns. All we can do is watch and wait and hope. I thought about my wife, who died 3 years ago, who loved the night sky as much as I did. We used to lie in the grass behind our house and point out constellations to each other, even though we both knew them by heart. It was our ritual, our quiet way of being together. I'm glad she didn't live to see this. Or maybe I wish she had. I can't decide. The stars are beautiful tonight, as they've always been. But I'll never look at them the same way again. Some of them are suns, burning with nuclear fire, illuminating planets that might have life of their own. And some of them are alive themselves, drifting through the void, waiting for whatever signal tells them to move. The night the stars came down changed everything. Not because of the destruction, though that was terrible enough, but because it revealed the truth about the sky. We were never alone up there. We just couldn't see what was watching. I stay on the runway until the cold drives me inside. Tomorrow, there will be work to do, planes to repair, a town to help rebuild, a world trying to make sense of what happened. But tonight, I just watch. The stars drift overhead, fixed in their ancient patterns, beautiful and terrifying and utterly mysterious. I wonder which ones are real. I wonder which ones are dreaming. And I wonder, when the next migration comes, if any of us will be ready. The universe is vast and old and full of things we don't understand. We're just a small world, orbiting a small star, looking up at lights in the darkness and making guesses about what they are. Some of those guesses were wrong. I suppose that's the lesson. We never knew as much as we thought we did. We never understood the sky as well as we believed. But we're still here, still watching, still wondering. That has to count for something. The night is quiet now. The migration has passed. The world goes on, and somewhere out there, drifting between the stars, things older than our sun continue their endless journey. They don't know we exist. They don't care. But we know about them now, and we'll never forget.